Recording, and I hand it over to John to call us to order.
Okay, well, I will call the meeting to order. And I believe we have a quorum, I believe. Is that right?
That is correct.
Well, that's just so excellent. Thank you all. I hate it when we go back to a board meeting and we have to say that, well, we talked about something, but we didn't have enough people to do a quorum. That's like, it's just a personal disappointment. I call the meeting in order, and then I guess the next step is to see whether there's public comment. Is that in slide 2?
Yeah.
Yes. So if are there any members of the public that are listening in on the meeting that would like to say something? Any public comment twice? Any public comment 3 times? And hearing none, we'll go on to the next item, which is the approval of the minutes from the June 5th and the October 10th meetings. Is there any objection to doing a vote on, can we do both of them together or do we need to do them separately?
I think you can do both of them together.
All right, well, unless there's any objections to that, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of June 5th and October 10th?
This is Brenda. I make a motion.
Thank you, Brenda.
This is Lonnie. I second it.
Great. Okay. So there's a motion made and seconded to accept the meeting minutes. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, well then we have passed the minutes. What is the next item? I think probably okay, we got an employee handbook update, and Eric or Brian, are you going to explain that?
Yes. So as the committee hopefully remembers, we made some updates to the employee handbook in October. And we have one cleanup item or something that got included that shouldn't have been included in our version control process. So I hand it over to Joe to walk us through this.
Thanks, Jeff. You don't mind going on to the next slide, Eric. Hi, everyone. Joe Buonanotte, Associate Director of Operations. So like Eric mentioned, in October, we brought to this committee and then ultimately to the board a revised version of our employee handbook with the 2 main updates being our new paid parental leave policy and revisions to our telecommuting policy, and then a few minor edits and clarifications. But after the board meeting, I realized that a version of the red line handbook that was included had some proposed changes to our vacation and bereavement leave policies that were not intended for committee or board approval. So the request today is just a cleanup on that to reject those changes and revert back to our longstanding vacation and bereavement policies. These updates or these erroneous updates were not communicated to the committee or the board for approval and never to staff either. So we don't think there's going to be any sort of impact on staff. It's just a verbiage change.
And there's a resolution that goes with that, correct?
There is.
All right. Well, there is a resolution in which we correct some kind of snafu that occurred and make it all right. Do I have a motion to move the resolution?
This is
This is
AD.
Lonnie.
So moved.
Okay, and this
I'm
is
sorry.
Lonnie. I'll second it.
Okay, so well, that's good. So we've got a motion made and seconded to correct some problems with the employee handbook. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any exempt, what do you call them? Abstentions? Yes. Okay, hearing none, the motion is approved. What's the next thing we got, Eric?
Next, we're up to targets and budget.
Okay, well, that, take it away.
All right. So I'll start with where we are and what's staying the same. We're 50% of the way through the year. We're making good progress towards our targets on, I would say good progress across the board, especially those that we're keeping the same. So we're keeping incentive programs flat. We're where we set our targets last summer. We're making good progress on the residential side of ESS. We've been out of market on the commercial side. That's now coming back. We have low goals there. Smarty is chugging along. It's been a little bit of a slower environment on the HVAC side, but we're still seeing progress. We've seen a pickup in solar. We have some updates on the program that we'll speak about at the board meeting that I think will cause us to see further growth. On the environmental infrastructure targets, those we're keeping the same. I know the Smarty target is a little slow going, but we have some new measures that are coming online this spring. And we have a big push into septic that I think will close the gap there. And the team is really focused on getting something through capital solutions this year. On our investments targets, we're making good progress getting money out the door and committed. I'll talk about that more in a second, even though we're leaving this target flat. Now, let me talk about what the changes are that we're asking the committee for approval of today. We're keeping our CPACE target where it is, have good progress there. Our SBA, the Small Business Energy Advantage, that's in line with the original forecasts. We're proposing two changes, one on the Marketplace Assistance Program and one on the PPA line here. I'll start with the Marketplace Assistance Program. That's basically just our change to targets here is basically bringing things in line with what's going to get closed this year in terms of state projects. So I think we're reducing by one project here and reducing the capital deployment numbers as well. But we do have others that are going to kind of make up for that we'll get across the line this year. On the power purchase agreement, we're decreasing by a larger number of projects. And that's due to, when we have the PPA targets here, this is referring to where we have third-party developers that are using our debt to develop power purchase agreements. And those developers have advised us that their pipelines are a little bit slower than what they had expected. They aren't expecting to draw on the funds. They're expecting less to be delivered this year in terms of projects. So that's the big driver here. We're still working with those developers, seeing what we can do to make sure that projects are getting completed, albeit a little bit slower than what we had expected. So overall, we're proposing a decrease in our financing programs targets by 10 projects and $14.7 million in capital deployment. And that will trickle down to the overall organization targets when we do that roll up. So any questions on the targets?
I've got a question about what the money for state projects and loans. What does that go to?
So that's predominantly solar, although is at least one fuel cell in there. Where this is where we are developing solar on state buildings. We're doing a fuel cell at a Department of Corrections. I know I was about to say, I feel like the ribbon cutting was like 2 months ago, but I'm realizing that that was actually much longer ago than that. We did the fish hatchery solar project. We've done a fair amount of work with Deep.
Well, why would we want to decrease the amount of projects when there's so many state buildings that need to be need renewables?
So I wouldn't say we're not decreasing what we're going to do overall. It's decreasing when we're going to do it. So, and this is reflective of the long timeline that these projects take in terms of getting agreements executed. There's a lot of review that has to be done, including with the agency and with the Attorney General's office.
But
We've made
doesn't
great
it also
projects.
reflect the number of projects?
So we are saying, hey, we're reducing the number of projects that are going to be done this fiscal year. That project that we're moving from this fiscal year, we're now looking at that closing in next fiscal year. So it's not that it's not going to get done. It's just not going to get done by the end of June.
Is this is this what's considered lead by example, or is that another program?
This is the successor to LBE.
I think it's called greener.gov now.
Yes.
But so two things. I think one of the
Oh,
things
okay.
I think what Mackie would suggest is that there's been increased competition in the NRES, the Non-Residential Energy Solutions Program. And some of the projects we submitted on behalf of the state did not win in that increasingly competitive market. So we're conscious of that. The second thing that he raised at the last deployment committee meeting to the deployment committee was, what if we brought to your attention or the board's attention projects that were outside of the NRES program, meaning it would be outside of the 100 megawatt cap, but what we would be relying on is the value of the renewable energy credit as a portion of the cash flow. So as you probably know, the NRES sets a specific energy and or REC price that gives project developers a stable sense of the cash flows for the project. You can also build projects outside of that program if you are comfortable with the variability of renewable energy credit prices in Connecticut that are subject to the Class 1 renewable portfolio standard. And because I would say, looking out as we increase our RPS to 40% by 2030, I think we're at 26% in 2025, that it's going to get increasingly harder because we're losing more of those offshore wind, all those other projects. Therefore, there's going to be pressure on price towards the cap. So it's going to be more towards $40 as opposed to lower price, which project developers don't like. So Mackie and the team are looking at that, actually trying to bring proposals to the deployment committee and get them comfortable with, a non-NRES proposal, which I think is great because markets are truly transformed when they operate outside of government incentives. And that's what we're trying to get to. So I think that's probably another.
Yeah, I mean, and John, to correct what I was saying before, we aren't changing the number of projects on MAP. So the number has stayed the same. It's just the capital deployment number that's gone down. So we're saying effectively a smaller project is going to get done this year, and the larger project we're pushing to next year.
Yeah, I get that. I just if we were to look at what percentage of state buildings have solar or some other energy efficiency measures, I don't think we would find a big percentage. And so how and when is that going to happen is sort of like the question in the air, not to be resolved in this meeting, but it's just like it's tied to this. somehow.
Yeah, no, it is. And to your point, John, I could tell you, I was in a meeting with the governor's chief of staff around this very point of if we aren't able to compete in the NRES program of the state may lose some potential projects through that mechanism. How might we identify other mechanisms so that the state can deploy more solar to achieve the potential that you're speaking to? So it is definitely on their mind because they see the energy savings potential that we've been bringing them with projects.
Yeah.
The market's getting competitive, so we're trying to find other ways of keeping things moving.
This is talking about Matt Brockman.
Yeah, that's right. There you go. Yep,
Yeah. Okay.
that's
Well,
right.
all right. All right. Well, thank you. I mean, I think maybe I'll.
I have a question just because I'm always trying to put things into people speak.
Right.
The NRES increased competition in NRES, isn't that a good thing?
It is, but what happens is it results in a decrease in the incentive level
Yeah,
for project development. So from a policy perspective, it's great because you're getting more out of the incentive. You're having ratepayers pay less than they would for 100 megawatts a year, right? So that's great. We want that. But as it becomes more competitive, the partners that we're trying to assist in that, one being the state, if the state projects aren't as competitive, then they can fall out and lose out. So what we're trying to do is find other mechanisms, other ways to get those projects to happen so that the state can save. But you're right, from a policy perspective, lower incentives is great. We all want that, less ratepayer costs.
well, and we need to be able to, when we're sort of talking about this stuff, take credit for that.
Yeah.
We weren't
Well,
going to
yeah,
take it
but
all on
you know-
ourselves. We were going to, make sure that the private sector was in the game and that there was more.
I do that on the residential side, Lonnie, where, right now, we ran the big program through 2022 and there was 50 megawatts a year being deployed. And now the utilities administer the incentive program. And it's really to the case you argued, net metering.
Yeah.
Almost 100% of those projects are net metered. So, and the market is now at about 110 megawatts a year, which is great. Like it's kind of off incentives, and it's running on pure net metering. Pura almost tried to get REC at a negative price. So to rather than give value to projects to take away so that they actually bring value back, it was super close. We wanted to see that happen. But market transformation is really, really important.
Well, yeah, and a lower price for the developers is an inevitable, outcome of what we're doing. And like for them to balk at that, I mean this is the part of it that everybody's supposed to love the marketplace, right? And the marketplace is driving the price down. That's like a good thing. I mean, the developers get less, but what the heck? They're supposed to. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
The difference between the residential and the non-residential market here is that the non-residential is capped at 100 megawatts. So the utilities probably got, 200 megawatts of demand. So therefore 100 lose, but the 100 win are very competitively priced. So there's less ratepayer cost for that 100 megawatts of delivery. In the residential space, there's no cap, and it's just let the market work to a net metered price. And it's taking off, and it's taking off so much that you have consumer protection issues, which I think is a sign of a market that's trying to work without kind of being handcuffed. And people are going to have to work through consumer protection issues, for the market to continue to scale. But that's why our team is thinking through, in the event of those 100 that missed the mark, are there other mechanisms outside of the NRES that we can enable, just purely using that renewable energy credit price as a mechanism to get the projects to move? And Mackie is working hard thinking about that.
Well, not to prolong the meeting, but what would happen if the cap was taken off on non-residential? Would it be to the benefit, ultimately of, ratepayers or not, or what?
Wasn't that a
It
Steinberg?
depends. So I would say it depends. I'm not as attuned in terms of what type of incentive the NRES are taking. Meaning, if they're taking that meter, just the avoided electric rate, then I would say that's great. But I don't think they're taking that. I think they're taking a tariff rate, a pure like dollar value for a 20-year period. That if you uncapped it, now you're exposing ratepayers to more potential tariff. And you're giving those who competed to be in the 100 the license to loosen up a little bit and say, I'll charge a little bit more, right? So it's a different market. I think this year, Chair Gillette, I think this year is working on a study that's going to inform beyond year 6. Lonnie, I think when you were co-chairing the ENT, you approved of a 6-year program, and they just did the 3rd-year review or 4th-year review. So they're now starting to look at year 7 and beyond, and the ENT co-chairs have said, look at what's going on here, and let's make sure ratepayers aren't exposed. We realize we want to get more out of it, but let's not expose ratepayers too much. So they're looking at it. Chair Gillette will definitely look at it.
Oh, this is an infinitely complicated subject somehow.
This is Lonnie. I'm just also, I think we've spoken in the past about making sure that at some point, I mean, maybe you've already done it, that William Tong is kind of in the loop because he says he's getting so many complaints about energy entities that aren't delivering what they're promising. And I think it'd be good to be at least in conversations with him.
Yeah, there is a.
I know there's a working
James
group.
can speak to this. Last session, there was a working group set up to look at consumer protection issues. We've designated we have fantastic staff, Stephanie Atria, to it, but the committee hasn't been set up yet. So like we're ready to go. But people, whatever.
Well, I'm just saying, I worked with him when he was in the House. We're good buddies, and when I run into him, he talks about this. So
I get calls every day.
Back just to sort of say, hey.
I get calls every day
we're
from
on
people.
Team, or you're on our team, or whatever. We're all looking for, the consumers not to be exploited.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good suggestion because, like I was saying that I get calls every day from people from far off lands wanting to solarize the house, supposedly. So, anyways, but not to prolong the meeting, Eric, why don't you go ahead? I apologize.
No apology needed. So, I mean, yeah, it's our targets overall pretty much flat, just a 10 project decrease and a $14.7 million decrease. Moving on to budget. I'll start with the revenues. So we're proposing a budget where we have increased income from the system benefit charge. And this is effectively, we do a forecast every year of what we think we're going to get. It's not that there's hey, here's a set amount that you're going to get. We do our budget off of forecasts. We take the prior years and we degrade it based off of kind of where we think demand is headed. So if we're doing our job from an energy efficiency perspective, overall demand is decreasing, and so are receipts from the utilities. When we did the process this year, we overestimated demand reductions, which is why we're forecasting this up slightly.
Can we say something?
Certainly.
So the $290,000 increase there.
250.
It is probably because we had that hot, humid part in our summer that was variable than our monthly projections that we do. So the team is increasing those projections. I can tell you when we started this, the Green Bank back in 2011, that utility customer assessment was $29 million. So we have been doing our job. We've been helping customers reduce their demand by 20% to get our utility assessment down. The harder we work, the less money we get on that public revenue. So we've done a great, all of the behind the meter solar that we've done, which is probably 600 megawatts, is reducing consumption and therefore our mill rate. So we've done a good job there. The additional adder is probably because of increased demand as a result of something that happened this summer.
Yeah.
Climate change, though. I just want to say that.
The other two items to note on here, we have an increase in grant income, and that's just we're hoping to draw more rapidly on the money from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is noted on here in NCIF related, the National Clean Clean Investment Fund and the Solar for All Fund, the two competitions from the GGRF that we won in. So it's a $6 million increase. I'll talk about that, those accelerated draws a little bit later. The other third item to note on here, all the other smaller adjustments, the vast majority of those are related to income in the subsidiaries for which we never included them in the budget previously. But now that they are wholly owned entities of Connecticut Green Bank after the buyouts of the lease funds, we now need to include them in this budget. So it's not an increase in spending. These would have been, or an increase in income. This would have come in anyway, but we're just now forced to include it here. So
Maybe just a comment on the GGRF real quick.
Sure.
Last year at this time when we were doing the mid-year budget revision, you might recall that we had a contingent budget that was contingent on us winning in the National Clean Investment Fund and Solar for All competitions. Literally at this time, almost last year, I was in meetings in front of the EPA advocating for the Coalition for Green Capital, which subsequently won a $5 billion award through the NCIF. So we are a subrecipient underneath the NCIF, and our contingent approval at the time was requesting from the board the ability to hire staff once we were notified of winning the award, which we were then told in April of 2024 that we were a winner. That's why we hired Stephanie Cohen, who's been doing a bang-up job getting all the contracts. And I'm literally looking at my cell phone minute to minute to see if the $93.5 million that would come to Connecticut on behalf of us, Puerto Rico, and New Hampshire has come into our bank account with Citibank, has in fact happened. So we're trying to get all the contracts are closed. We've got our account control agreement with Citibank closed. We're now waiting for that money to transfer. As you all can imagine, the timeliness of that transfer is super important. And so you're seeing the utilization of those, or the realization of those revenues, which means that we would have expended it, not that it's sitting there. We need to actually invest those resources. And as you'll hear later on, if we don't invest those resources, we lose it. It goes back to CGC. So we're trying to push as hard as we can our team to continue to work harder to get those resources invested. So that's why we're showing the grant income increase.
All right, so moving on to expenses.
Hey, can I just say one thing about the revenues? What a good job you all been doing. That's all I want to say. It's impressive. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will start talking through the adjustments to our expenses here. So you'll see some items on here marked by C, which are reflective of the inclusion of the items that were previously not included in our budget, but now need to be because they're in the subsidiaries that are wholly owned. So that's split across the financials. Again, this is money that is spent virtually every year to keep the systems owned by SL2 and SL3 up and running, as well as just to depreciate them, so on and so forth. So yeah, nothing new in those to highlight. I'd like to highlight adjustments D, which is a total of $243,000 in for 3 new positions, which includes a corporate paralegal, an outreach associate manager, and an ESS senior manager. This is increased volume. We need an additional paralegal to facilitate some of the work that we're planning around community campaigns, especially with regard to Solar for All and potentially some of the single family green homes goals that we have for the NCIF money. We need the outreach associate manager, and the ESS senior manager is somebody who would be or will be focused on helping us work with Pura and just continue the momentum that we seem to have at the moment with the program. The next item to highlight is $150,000 in new spending in research and development. We have 3 pots that this money is going to be split into equally. The first is related to clean transportation. We just received bids for our first RFP for clean transportation investments. This is one of the new markets we're hoping to unlock with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund monies. One of the ideas that we're going to do with the money is to look for a fleet transition advisor, I believe is the appropriate term. So it's somebody who's going to work with the school districts on helping them plan for their buses and their bus fleets to convert from diesel to electric. And so this is effectively for us to bring somebody on board to facilitate that. The next $50,000 is for energy storage solutions and the work that we're doing on battery end of life. So what happens to batteries when they're no longer being used? We need to come up with a plan for recycling and disposal of the various battery components. And finally, we have $50,000 to support some of the work that we're planning on doing around community-based campaigns. This is linked to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund money deployment. So this is money we're flagging to increase adoption, especially in low-income and disadvantaged communities. Finally, I want to highlight adjustment F for $200,000. It's an increase in the consulting budget, which I've added in here for any reporting compliance needs for Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. I think we are in an extraordinarily good place for reporting, especially relatively, being that we've been working with EPA since they've been developing requirements. A lot of their requirements are based off of our recommendations. That said, getting everything to work in as much of an automated fashion and be as painless as possible it isn't always easy. Hence, we're budgeting this money as a kind of break the glass in case of emergency as it comes to compliance reporting. Any questions on expenses?
I don't see anything for a budget committee restaurant fund, and I really think we ought to include that, don't you?
John, I've offered to cook for the rest of the year for you guys.
I mean, Carbone's would be a nice place to do this meeting. I'm just suggesting. Anyways,
Is there a motion on the floor, John, for that?
hey, you know,
Maybe we can go to the Kentucky Derby. I heard that doesn't cause any problems.
Only if we fly privately, Brian.
One
That
step
was
at a
a
time, Ryan, one step at a
throwback.
time.
That was a fraud throwback.
I know.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, this is all, you know, good. So do we have a resolution on this stuff that we need to do?
A couple more things to go through before we get to the
Okay.
resolution. So just want to highlight in non-operating expenses, we have a couple of adjustments. Again, we have adjustment C, which is reflective of the subsidiaries that are now rolling up. We have adjustment G, which is a small $40,000 adjustment. We're getting some of the, we're paying some old RCIP incentives that are coming in higher than forecast, better performance, so higher incentives. And then on battery storage, we have an increased incentive amount of 651,000, all on the residential side. This goes back to the way that we estimated the original incentives along with the targets, which was really incongruous. So we basically brought that in line to what it needs to be based off of deployment. We still are expecting to deploy towards the targets. We basically had just underestimated the incentives previously.
Yeah, I was going to say on that first slide of not changing the targets under the energy storage solutions, you might recall it was 500 residential projects. We are seeing Posigen pick up. We've all been waiting for Posigen to pick up its solar and storage offering. So when Posigen picks up, that means low-income families pick up. So that means more incentives. So that's probably the adjustment that we're seeing here is that they get twice the level of incentives as not.
Some of it is that. Some of it was I'll eat it. It was bad estimation. So
Underestimate.
yeah, that I think we thought that there was going to be a little bit of a delay between approving something and paying incentives, and we've been more efficient at getting stuff out the door. So yeah, we now know that we can be efficient, and
it's a good number when you see that number go up because it means projects are happening.
Yes,
good.
So, any questions on this? All right.
There was one thing, Eric, that you were mentioning about, I think it was actually a slide before about battery disposal.
Yes.
And there ought to be like some sort of best practices of some states out there that are ahead of us on this, aren't there?
There really isn't anybody ahead of us on this. And what we're doing right now is trying to develop those best practices.
I think the takeaway. So one of the things here, John, is Pura charged the Green Bank with convening a group to think about solar and storage recycling. As part of our waste and recycling primer, which will be coming out in March, this analysis and really fantastic work that was done. My takeaway are several things. One, on the solar PV side, the materials have lower value in their recycling than battery storage. Battery storage, the materials have high value, so we're likely to see the markets take back batteries because there is value for the materials in the batteries versus solar, which doesn't. So how do we think about, because we've deployed, what did I say, 500-600 megawatts of solar? That is a lot of solar that after 20-25 years can end up in a landfill. We don't want that to happen. So Pura, there's our team just did a bang up job led by Sarah Harari looking at that. And, there's no policy directing anybody to do anything, but we're understanding the situation, and Pura now has the information and will inform the E&C committee leaders of what to do.
Well, there's a there's a phrase an educator from Brazil came up with, we make the road by walking. And that's what it sounds like we're doing in this case.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's when we talk about the RCIP program, we talk about it being the most effective in the entire Northeast on a watt per capita basis, the most efficient in the entire Northeast. We gave away the least amount of renewable energy credit per watt and the most equitable. We had the most less than 80% area median income adoption of solar than the entire Northeast. But the problem was we missed the fourth E, which was end of life. And my mentor at Yale would not like the fact that we missed the end of life because it's going to be a huge problem if we don't address it. So,
right. Okay, well, thank you for that answer.
It's Lonnie quickly. I was in Taiwan a couple of years ago and they were showing me how they're really careful with all that stuff in terms of reusing it and stuff. Do we deal with them at all in terms of
I chuckle only because there was a conversation about should we consider sending old modules overseas to be reused, and or should we be thinking about in Connecticut how to reuse our modules and how are they incented for reuse when they've already been used by a policy one time. So those things are like in front of Pura as things to think about. But yeah, you're right. Like the reuse market is an important one. The question is like, is the benefit greater than the costs? And therefore the market forces won't move unless the benefits are greater than the cost.
Yeah.
Any other questions on this? All right, two more quick things to run by the committee before we get to the resolution. The first, I'll just pause. We're proposing an increase of our capital expenditures budget of $25,000 for some new furniture in Stamford. And we brought over furniture when we moved offices 5 years ago, and there's some things that need some updates. So with that, I want to move on to the incentive compensation proposal. So going back to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, as part of the National Clean Investment Fund, the Green Bank was awarded $93 million as a sub-awardee. We are responsible for using these funds towards Connecticut, $40 million, New Hampshire, $15 million, in Puerto Rico, $38 million. Basically, funds invested through the end of this calendar year are treated as a grant by the Coalition for Green Capital and will remain in perpetuity on the Green Bank's balance sheet. So if thinking about like, if we spend all $40 million, and by spend, I mean invest, at rates that are typical of the Green Bank, so thinking 5% for 15-year durations, that's an additional $2 million in interest income that the Green Bank would receive on an annual basis. Anything that we don't spend this time next year must be returned to the Coalition for Green Capital. We would still have access to it, but we would have to access it as a loan. These funds have various federal requirements. So for those of you that have received and dealt with federal funds, you may be aware of these, but there are requirements that around Build America, Buy American, Davis-Bacon, which is about paying a prevailing wage that we would need to demonstrate, disadvantaged business enterprises, that these are in addition to what we already practice as the Green Bank. So these are added requirements on the money. We've set out and said, hey, we're going to use this money not to juice CPACE or do things that we've done in the past. We're really looking at this money to unlock markets and to expand our impact, to do things we haven't done previously. If you look at the priority investment areas that were in our application, we said we're going to use the money towards clean transportation, hence our RFP around electric school buses. We're looking at how do we transform that, our PPA product, to bring it to affordable multi-housing developments. We're looking at green schools, green homes, going beyond what we've typically done with Smarty, making sure that we're getting into the low income and disadvantaged communities. So, and we realize we have to do all of this while making prudent investments. We aren't going to bring you guys a pile of junk to say, hey, we're going to go invest this here. We need to have our same, if not more, due diligence, being that these are new areas that we're going into. So I'm coming to you to propose the creation of an incentive compensation plan to really get staff to go above and beyond, to get these funds out the door, to unlock these new markets, and frankly, to grow our organization's balance sheet. We're incentivized to get the money out quickly, and I want to pass that incentive on to staff. We aren't doing this with ratepayer capital. We're doing this with the federal funds. I'm seeking your permission before we fully design a incentive compensation program, but what we've discussed is something that would be based off of the actuals. Any payment for this would be funded out of the FY 2026 budget and linked to the money that we actually get out invested. So what's the present value of the interest income that we would get off of the money, and we would reserve a percentage of that. We would have sub goals around expending the funds and making sure that we're exceeding the targets, and focusing on those priority areas that we've previously set forth. I think from an organizational management perspective, from a pure economics perspective, I think this is a great opportunity to make sure that we're bringing staff along with the organization's goals and making sure that they're compensated for that. So right now, the ask is not for you to fund this pool, but it's to say, hey, we'll commit to funding it in next year's budget. And so you can go ahead and design something and communicate to staff that we will have a pool, because we want to make sure that we're starting to communicate that now, so that they're working to get money out the door sooner rather than later. Questions or thoughts?
I guess I had some questions, that I gave to Eric earlier about how this all would work. And it seems to me that it matches up in a better way with what some folks in finance would be doing in the private market if they were there. And in that way, I think it helps us retain talent that might go elsewhere at not a big price. So, and that's always a concern. The Green Bank has got an incredible stable of talented people, but they could almost all make more money in the private sector if they just were going for the dollar. And I think the sense of mission is a great thing, but a pay is always a nice thing too out of a job. So I think it's definitely worth seeing how it goes. Any other discussion on this?
Adrienne.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to think about this, because it ties the performance so directly to successes that have already been acquired. And this is a big deal, and it won't come around every year. Hence, it's an opportunity, and I think it's a great idea to spend some time really scratching our heads and talking about the methods and how to use it and how to split it up. And it's an opportunity that I think it's a very good idea to seize now. So kudos for getting on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Lonnie. I totally agree. And I also think that it's also a way of creating some models going forward of some really exciting projects. That we can, it keeps the juice flowing when and as you've said, we have a lot of talent that's come out of some amazing schools and amazing organizations who, to get their creativity going and to really show them that we value that and reward that. I think it's a very good idea.
Well, I think that brings us to the resolution.
Yeah, folks should read it through, and then if I could have a motion on the resolution, that would be good.
I make a motion. This is Brenda.
This is Lonnie. I second.
Okay, well, we've had a motion and seconded, and normally we say under discussion, but we've had a lot of discussion. Is there anybody have any last words on this? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? Any abstentions? Okay, well, the motion passes unanimously.
Awesome. Well, I think that takes us to our last item, which is to adjourn.
Well, this is a non-debatable motion, and I'm just gonna vote for it. We're done. Thank you all for being here and hanging in, especially with all my digressions. But the Green Bank just continues to be a number one in my book. So thank you all. We're working for the Green Bank for what you do. So I guess that's it. Have a lovely day.
Well, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Committee.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Take
John.
care.
Love the Walt
Bye-bye.
Whitman, John. Keep it coming.